Assalamu alaikum, dear student. My name is Ikra Kuratulan, your co-teacher for the subject Applied Linguistics from University of Education, Lahore, DG Khan Campus, Department of English. Our today topic is procedural syllabuses. So let's start our today's lecture. So before moving towards our main topic, that is procedural syllabuses, we will take a general overview about what is syllabus. There are different linguists and experts who give definitions and explanations about this syllabus. Today we will discuss some of these definitions. So first of all is according to Wilkins. In 1981, Wilkins pointed out that syllabuses are specification of the content of the language teaching which have been submitted to some degree of structuring or ordering with the aim of making teaching and learning a more effective process. Even that Widdowson in 1990 also interprets syllabus as the specification of a teaching program or pedagogic agenda which defines a particular subject for a particular group of learners. A syllabus specification then is concerned with both the selection and the ordering of what is to be taught. Next one, another expert, another linguist, that is Noam in 1898 define about the differentiate between curriculum and syllabus. He believes that curriculum is a wider term as compared with syllabus. Curriculum covers all the activities and arrangements made by the institutions throughout the academic years to facilitate the learners and the instructor, whereas syllabus is limited to a particular subject or particular area of a particular class. Another expert, Hilden in 1987, also refers to syllabus as a summary of a content to which learner will be exposed. Next, we will move towards the types of syllables. There are two types of syllables basically. First one is product oriented syllabus and second one is process oriented syllabus. As we know that, the product oriented syllabus basically focused on the product. So product oriented syllabus emphasize the product of that language learning in which the teaching is done or we are going to learn that language. It only focus on that product. And product oriented syllabus, in product oriented syllabus different separate. Next one is the acquisition is a type of oriented syllabus. Acquisition becomes a process of gradual accumulation of parts. It means we learn parts by parts. It's a gradual accumulation parts basically. Acquisition. Third one is learner. Fourth one is in that product oriented syllabus. Learner is being exposed to a deliberately limited sample of a language. And second one is syllabus oriented syllabus. When we talk about process oriented syllabus, it operates in terms of the purposes for which people are learning language and the kinds of a language performance that are necessary to meet. So in that type, the main focus is on learning that the purpose of the people who language and also the focus on the kinds of language performance, in which way the performance. These syllabuses also developed a result of a sense of failure in product-oriented courses to enhance communicative language skill. It's a process rather than a product. That type of syllabus is also is focused not on what the student will have accomplished on completion of a program that is involved in product oriented syllabus, but that type of syllabus focuses on the specification of learning tasks and activities that he or she will undertake during the course. Different examples that syllabus, the procedural um, uh, syllabuses, process syllabuses, task-based syllabuses are the best example of process-oriented. So now we will move our main topic, that is procedural syllabus. As with our previous discussion, we can say that the procedural syllabus is a type of process-oriented syllabus that focus on the process and the performance of that learner in that syllabus basically. Basically, process syllabus is latest type focuses on and emphasizes classroom activities that stimulates internal learning processes. This syllabus type specifies the tasks, activities, and problems engaged in the classroom, which will be carried out in the real world. The procedural syllabus is developed and associated with Prabhu Rahmani and other his colleagues at the Regional Institute of English in Bangalore, India. This type of syllabus is also known as Bangalore procedural syllabus because this English language teaching course of study was designed by Prabhu in 1987, and the aim of that project or that approach was to teach English to primary school across Bangalore in South India. So on that reason, because the research is done at Bangalore school, so we can say that this is also known as Bangalore procedural syllabus and denoted as BPS. The basic tenets of BPS, that is Bangalore Procedural Syllabus, is that the form of the language can be best learned when the attention is placed on what the words actually mean. According to Prabhu, the way that language is learned is through the communication basically. The main concern of Prabhu's in that approach is with the form of language, but mostly with how it is used within a context, so that student can draw meaning for the language that they are applying. Therefore, this syllabus will use as its key strategy task-based learning. So we can say that the methodology that is based for BPS is not concerned with the form of language, but mostly with how it is used within a context, and because that give attention to the meaning um, of the for the language that the learner are using or applying basically. This form of learning, that is procedural syllabus, has its basic premises that the internal language acquisition processes that take place in human brain will automatically organize and encode the target language as the student makes conclusion and assumptions through various tasks or process. So that procedural syllabus is concerned with the process and the different types of activities and tasks that are given to the learner to learn that language, to learn that target language basically. So as mentioned earlier, the procedural syllabus is associated with the work of Prabhu and his colleagues in Bangalore project. Prabhu is dissatisfied with the structure oral situational method, that is SOS method, which was widely practiced in the 1960s and 1970s in India. Prabhu decided to bring about a change in the traditional English language teaching methodology of his country, that followed the structured oral situational method. So Prabhu has observed that the students who have been taught English through SOS method, that is structured oral situational method, for several years at school were still unable to use it outside the class for communicative process. So the students who are learning through the SOS method can use the language in their classroom activities, but they are failed to use that language in for communicative process to the real world. So in that way, Prabhu is so much dissatisfied with that structural or situational method. So to the opposite to that method, he has decided to develop a new methods about the which the main concerns is about the communication. So the student can communicate outside the classroom easily in real world situations. So for that purpose, he developed an approach that based on learning, in which the attention is given to its meaning. It's been the main attention is given to language meaning, and according to Prabhu, the way the language is learned, according to him, requires not systematization of language inputs or maximizations of planned practice, but rather than creation of conditions in which the learners engage in an effort to cope with the communication. So, as a result, Babu decided to introduce the principles of communicative teaching, language teaching, in his well known experimental project, which he has also given the name of procedural Bangalore syllabuses, that is PBS. That project is started from 1979 and lasting for 5 years, that is 1979 to 1984. This project was implemented in 8 classrooms with 18 teachers and 390 children with the age of 8 to 15 for periods of 1 or to 3 years from 1979 to 1984. Early influences were similar to those of the Malaysian communicative syllabus, but were quickly abandoned. As the project was not set up as an experiment, so evaluation was not part of that original plan basically. These students receive their English instructions based on what Prabhu called the procedural syllabus. So the instructions are given to them in English, and these instructions are named as procedural syllabus. This is an approach to language teaching which is learning centered rather than learner centered. The syllabus does not focus on any predetermined language content. Rather, class time is spent on doing a number of problem solving tasks which are intended to promote language acquisition. So we can say that there is no predetermined language content about that project. Some activities are given in the class timing to the students, and these tasks are problem solving, and through that problem solving task students learn their target language, and that approach focused on learning center. According to Prabhu, language acquisition occurs when learners' attention is on meaning rather than on the language form. This is best achieved when learners are asked to do a number of meaning focused activities. which result in natural communication in the classroom. So the main focus of that project is on the meaning of that language, not on the form of that language. It is in fact the firm conviction of Babu that optimal learning takes place when the target language is taught through communication and not simply for communications. So the Babu's main focus is on the learning of a language by communication, not for the communication. It is best achieved when learners are asked to do a number of focused activities which result in natural communication in the classroom. So, as we earlier says that Prabhu's main focus is on language, on target language is taught by communication, not for communication. He also says the word communicative teaching is most Western thinking has been training for communication, which I claim involves one in some ways or other in preselection. It is a kind of matching of notions and form, whereas the Bangalore project is teaching through communication, and therefore the very notion of communication is different. Prabhu forced that teaching through communication takes place when learners are involved in doing set of tasks. A task is an activity which gets learner to arrive at an outcome from given information through a process of thought, and which allows the teacher to control this process. As can be observed, this definition of task has a cognitive orientation, that is, it involves learners in a thinking process. Prabhu's definition of task for the purpose of Bangalore project was an activity which required learn to arrive at an outcome from given information through some process of thought, and which allowed teacher to control and regulate that process was regarded as a task. Another point which should be mentioned about the task is the procedural syllabus is that they should be at a reasonable level of difficulty. In other words, students should face some challenge in doing the task. If the task is too easy, students may not take it seriously. If on the other hand, it is too difficult, that might be reluctant to give it a try. So there should be some reasonable level of difficulty in a task, uh, so student can take it seriously and involved in that activity. A task is reasonably challenging if approximately half of the students in a class are successful in doing approximately half of the task. This in fact is the formula by which teacher can grade and sequence the task of the subsequent lessons. The following is an example of a task used in the procedural syllabus, where student received a set of instruction to draw a simple picture. The example is that the first step, draw a line from left to right. Step B, second, write B at right end of the line and A at the left end. Step 3, draw another line below AB. Fourth step, write D at its left and C at its right end. And the last step is join B and D. So that is the example about a task in which the instructions are given to the student in a target language, and By that task, student can easily learn their target language, and even that they can perform their task easily, and teacher can evaluate their performance uh, uh, by that process, so that if student can understand that target language instruction, then they easily perform some action on that instructions. So that is an example of a task activity in which students are given some kinds of task and they have to perform on that activity. Next one is the last point, what's nothing about the procedural syllabus is related to the way language errors are corrected. Um, uh, Purbo, uh, Purbo's methodology, error correction is done incidentally rather than systematically. In other words, the teacher provides student with the correct form, but he or she does not attempt to focus on a linguistic form by teaching them the rules of grammar. Prabhu denies the sufficiency of comprehension input that is defined by Christian in 1982, but he supports the idea that students need plenty of opportunity to develop their comprehension abilities before any production is demanded of them. He recognized that acquisition of a linguistic structure is not an instant one-step procedure, and claims with questions that language form is acquired subconsciously through the operation of some internal system of abstract rules and principles. When the learner's attention is focused on meaning, that is task completion, not language. Um, to Prabhu, teaching through communication rather than for communication is an important aspect of this syllabus. Prabhu also emphasizes that a task is a procedural syllabus should be intellectually challenging enough to maintain students' interest, for that is what will sustain learners after efforts to task completion. Focus them on the meaning, and as part of that process engage them in confronting the task's linguistic demands. So when we talk about the tasks that are used in procedural syllabuses, according to these tasks, the procedural syllabus is divided into three main phases, and these three main phases are pre-task phase, task phase, and the making phase. Each lesson in the procedural syllabus consists of a pre-task, a task, and a quick making component. The task and the pre-task are two similar and parallel activities in that they require similar process of reasoning and considered of similar question types, situations, sets of facts, and so forth. The pre-test, however, is a teacher-guided whole class activity which helps learner overcome the difficulties they might be faced with while doing the task. Thus, the pre-task could be viewed as preparation for the task which is to follow. The pre-task phase. First one is the pre-task phase. Pre-task phase serves another function. It gives extrovert learners an opportunity to learn by making an attempt, and introvert learners the opportunity to learn without taking the risk of public failure. In another word, it is a confidence building activity which all learners can benefit from. After the completion of the pre-task publicity, the next phase is the task phase. It is time for the students to do the task individually. They are allowed to do the task in pairs or in groups. However, this is neither recommended nor encouraged on the groups. that it is likely to result in fossilization. In Purbo's opinion, it is necessary for learners' internal system to be firmed up by superior data, that is, input which comes from native or native-like sources. Finally, phase is the making phase. There comes the third component of each lesson, which is the making stage. At this stage, the teacher checks the students' work and gives them some feedback on the basis of their accuracy in performing the task. Not their accuracy in producing well-formed sentences, even only concerned with the accuracy in performing that task. So that is the third phase of that procedural syllabus. Prabhu recommended lesson structure falls into three sections. First one is presentation and demonstration of pre-task by the teacher in the whole class format. Second is the task proper, worked on usually individual. And third one is feedback from the teacher, regulated and presented by the teacher. That is basically the three P's about the pre-task, the task phase, and the making phase, that we define as presentation and demonstration in pre-task. Second one is task properly, that second P, and that involved with the work usually individual. And third P is about presented, that concerned with the feedback of the teacher about the performances of the learners. These three P's approach typically of synthetic syllabi, though largely discredited by SLA theory. This three-tiered structure appears 10 years later in Wallace, who proposes a three-tiered framework for task-based learning in which the teacher still has the overall control. Thus, negotiation of syllabus content, self-direction, and learner-centeredness factors so important in other examples of the process are absent from this type of TBS, in which the teaching techniques required are not very different from those of ordinary mainstream language teaching. In practice, two related tasks or two versions of the same task were typically paired. The first, as we discussed earlier, the pre-task was used by the teacher in a whole class format, perhaps with one or more students. Its purpose was to present and demonstrate the task, to assess its difficulty for the class, if necessary to modify it accordingly, and perhaps most important of all, for what Prabhu described as to let the language relevant to it come into play. The second, as we discussed earlier, the task phase. The task phase was for the pupils to work on, usually individually. There followed feedback from the teacher on the task accomplishment, that is, we earlier discussed in the making phase. Tasks in procedural syllabus should be intellectually challenging enough to maintain students' interest. For that, it will sustain learners' effort at task completion, focus them on meaning, and as part of that process, engage them in confronting the task's linguistic demands. On opinion gap and later information gap and reasoning gap activities are favored in Bangalore project. It is important that learners perceive a task as presenting a reasonable challenge that is as difficult but feasible. Difficulty is initially a matter of trial and error. Next, we discuss the positive and negative characteristics that are related to procedural syllabus. So first one we will discuss about the positive characteristics. It is widely applicable. It can be easily applied in different classes at different students in different timings, and can easily be easily used to learn target language easily. Second one is suitable for learners of all ages and backgrounds. That procedure syllabus is suitable for every kind of student that belongs to any age or any background. They can easily learn target language. Third one is functional ability. It should be a natural outcome of the instructional experience. The next positive characteristic of that approach is innovative. That procedure or sorry that approach is innovative. Student can learn target language with the help of innovations and creating new things, new ideas, new tasks, and performing new problems, new tasks, activities easily. And with the help of innovation they can learn their target language more perfectly and properly. Next is student learn linguistic forms through communication. Even that not only student perform on their task activities or problem solving activities, but by using the instructions that are given in this task, student can easily learn linguistic forms of a language through communication with each other, with their teachers, and even with each others. And last, as we discussed it earlier, there is a naturalness. Students can learn target language in a natural environment with the help of their teacher and the peer groups. In a natural way they can learn their target language. Next, we will discuss the negative characteristics of this approach. Uh, the problems lie in implementing the instructions that requires creativity and initiate on the part of the teacher. If teachers are traditional and do not have the time or resources, this type of teaching may be impossible. Yes, it may happen if teachers are not so much modern and not using innovative techniques in their teaching process, or they have not enough time or resources to do such kinds of activities or things. Then that kind of method or approach may be full for teaching the language. So for this method or approach, teachers should be according to the situation, should work according to the situation, and some creation and innovative things should be the part of his teaching. Otherwise the teaching of target language may be failed. Next is traditional students may not like it either. They feel they are not learning anything. And the traditional student cannot accept the innovative things in their learning, and the thought that they are just wasting their time, and by doing such kind of tasks they cannot learn anything. So that is the mental impact on their learning language, and the learning of target language may fail there. Another negative characteristic of this approach is that Prabhu also discourage the group work. Mostly the main focus of Prabhu's uh, ideas is linked with the individual work. So sometimes it may fail the communicative process in this approach. Next one is inadequate coverage of the language. And the next, the syllabus lacks any real life task. Even that marker or other linguists or experts also criticize procedural syllabus. So our next top point is criticism about that approach. Amongst other criticism of the Bangalore project, the main has been its failure to build an evaluation component into the design. Criticism rarely made of programs using synthetic syllabi. Long and Crooks identify other difficulties. The first one is the absence of task-based need identification leaves no rationale for the content of the syllabi. It is impossible for anyone to verify the accuracy of particular pedagogic tasks. In the absence of task-based need identification, no rationale exists for the content of such a syllabus, that is, for task selection. It is impossible for anyone to verify the accuracy of a particular pedagogic task for a given group of learners without objective evaluation criteria, one of which must surely be relevant to learners' need. Next, criticism is about grading of tasks. Difficulty and sequencing of tasks appear to be arbitrary, and it left the teacher. The half the class doing half the task criterion is not a satisfactory solution, since it is a norm referenced and gives no indication of why any one task is easier than another. Grading task difficulty and sequencing tasks both appear to be arbitrary process left partly to real-time impressionistic judgments by the class teacher. Use of 50% of the task by half the class criterion for assessing difficulty is not a satisfactory solution, for it makes task achievement of norm reference ratios reveals nothing about what made one task easier than another, and thereby precludes any generalization to new materials. Moreover, if the presence of pedagogic tasks in a syllabus is justified at all, as we assume it should be, then the criterion referenced approach is called for. The passing grade might vary somewhat, but if a task is a necessary part of the syllabus, it is presumably necessary for all students. 70% is accepted as a satisfactory minimum passing grade on many criterion reference language tests, but higher cutoff points favor increased decision and dependability of such tests. So, third criticism is about there is no need for incomprehensible output and communication breakdowns if learners are to perceive negative evidence as such in SLA. There are logical arguments having to do with the need for negative evidence and incomprehensible input in SLA, and empirical findings on instructed interlanguage development, which supports the need for a focus on form in language teaching, yet this is prescribed in Probus as in Christian's work. Now, the fourth criticism is about it is important to notice input-output mismatches so that learning can occur. White also observed that in terms of empirical demonstration of the fact of organizations and procedures of learning outcomes, there has been no really concreted effort to evaluate any approach in actual operation. Despite the growing body of research into the effects of procedure on language learning is uh, tutored setting. So that is our today topic about procedural syllabuses in learning a target language. Here are the references. If you these can be more helpful for you in getting more material about this topic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you will understand it. Stay home, stay safe, stay blessed. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.